Hey, what's up guys? It's Jake, aka Tag, and today we're back here again to learn a little bit more about 2.9 XBOW from Ian. Ian is currently sitting pretty at 32 in the world, with 2.9 asserting dominance against some of the hardest possible matchups. Obviously, when you're playing 2.9, there's going to be a lot of really difficult matchups, whether it's going to be Mortar Bait with Barb Barrel, whether it's going to be Golem Lightning, or RG Lightning with Barb Barrel. I mean, let's see how Ian navigates this matchup. First off, RG Lightning against some of the better players in the world, top 200. The RG players are not really going to make misplays. So I want to see what Ian does in this matchup to make sure that he has a higher potential of winning. He's going to increase his shot and maximize his utility of all of his cards to have a better chance at winning this matchup by making sure, hey, I have an advantage after my opponent goes in for a Mega Minion, and I'm going to end up going for an Expo in the opposite lane, because maybe they end up having a Golem deck, we don't really know yet, and now we see the Lightning. So Ian has already gotten some damage on the left-hand side. He's seen Baby Dragon, he's seen Mega Minion. This is looking like a Golem Lightning deck, could also end up being an RG deck. He doesn't know yet, but he did apply aggression when the Mega Minion was dropped on the right-hand side, because that's a hefty investment. Ian told me that whenever he sees his opponent drop a 4 Elixir card or more, he always goes, no matter what it is. But if it's a Mega Minion, he'll actually rush opposite line with a Expo. And if your opponent does not end up having Mega Minion in cycle when they're running Golem, it's very hard for them to ever break through an Expo plus Tesla. So you can actually go in for an Expo on offense and single Elixir. And if your opponent ends up going for a Golem right into it, you can just go in for Archers and Tesla, and you can end up cycling back to another Expo and keeping that Tesla alive. So if it was a Golem deck, that's actually a really good play by Ian right there. And I usually never really went in before seeing a 4 Elixir card. If they saw a 4 Elixir card, then I would go opposite lane. But I now learned from Ian that if it's a Mega Minion, you can actually go opposite lane as well. Got a lot of damage already on the left-hand side. He sees a Baby Dragon, he sees Mega Minion, he drops an Ice Spear. He saw Furnace earlier, so he knows that 100% is going to end up being RG Lightning. It's not going to end up being a Golem deck. He is also going to see a Electro Wizard there. Another thing that I learned from him is he told me that whenever you see a defensive Furnace in a spot that you can't really snipe with an Expo, you never really want to go in for defensive Expo. So you're going to see him consistently go in for more and more Fireballs and drop Skeletons here to discourage his opponent from getting chip damage. He actually messed up a little bit there. Even some of the best players in the world do mess up. But you guys are seeing him go opposite lane when he sees an RG in the back. That's another thing that he talked about consistently. If you see your opponent going for an RG in the back, you don't really want to allow them to start a huge push. He baited out the Lightning, so now his opponent can't actually feasibly cycle back because it takes 4 more cards. So his opponent will not be able to Lightning this Tesla, and as a result, he should be able to defend this rather easily. He's even able to cycle the Ice Golem really close to the Tesla and the tower because he knows that his opponent doesn't end up having the Lightning back in cycle. So if your opponent ever goes RG in the back, you can end up going in for an Expo and punish the opposite lane. He told me in the Balloon Cycle matchup, and in this matchup in particular, he loves going opposite lane. Usually with Expo, when you know that your opponent has a tank and a unit that, well, a spell that can do damage on your tower, you never really want to give them ability to drop the tank and then spell the weaker tower. You always want them to have to spell the tower that has more HP. So notice where he drops the defensive Expo. He doesn't drop it in the middle, he drops it in a range where his opponent will not be able to Lightning that and a Tesla if he decides to drop that on the left-hand side. So he actually decided not to go for the Tesla there. He decided to go in for a Log, and that's also just maximizing his efficiency with Elixir. And it also allows him to cycle a little bit more cards. So if you're cycling like Archers and Log, opposed to just cycling a Tesla, that's 2 cards, so you're back to Expo really quickly. He outcycled his opponent, and then he breaks through, and he's going to get a lot of damage on the left-hand side because his opponent does not end up having enough Elixir to reset. Because if he does, he's going to try to drop like an Electro. Electro wasn't even in cycle. Lightning is 6 Elixir, just not happening. So one of the things that I just took away from there, I know for a fact that my personal preference is always to play like, hey, I'm going to go and drop my Tesla and just make sure that nothing breaks through. But obviously it would have been a huge misplay because Archers, as you guys just saw, allowed him to cycle back to the Expo, and it allowed him a much better defense to offense conversion. Another thing that he told me in this matchup, and in most matchups in particular, especially at ladder, you can cycle Fireballs and Logs when your opponent is at 1,500 HP. So you guys can convert that into tournament standard or your own levels on ladder. But 1,500 HP on max ladder is the benchmark that you want to do for spell cycling your opponent generally. So that was an extremely cool game against RG Lightning. My biggest takeaway was Ian was not very reliant on his buildings when he did not need to be. He never wasted Elixir. He ended up dropping the Archers and a Log to mitigate the RG damage. And he never dropped defensive Expos as often as I traditionally would have, because he's able to make sure that his opponent's not getting free lightning value on the tower, and he's going to be going opposite lane for an aggressive Expo when he sees a RG in the back. So those are a lot of things that I learned, and it was really cool. So let's move on to the next game, and let's keep learning, guys. So another thing that I really want to stress from the last matchup is how he fireballed the Electro Wizard and the Furnace, opposed to dropping a lot of defensive Expos on that. He'll drop a defensive Expo if he sees a Lumberjack in the back or a Mega Man in the back, because then he's preparing for defense. But against the Fire Spirits, he'd rather just end up going for a Fireball on top of the Furnace, because usually a better RG player, like as you guys saw, they're never going to really allow you to snipe the Furnace with the Expo, unless it's maybe the first Furnace. All other Furnaces will be placed behind or barely in front of the King Tower, so you're never really going to be able to snipe that. And if there's just Fire Spirits, you never really want to waste the defensive Expo on that, because it gives them lightning value. So I just want to cover that. Let's get right into this matchup. We ended up seeing a Mortar Bait player. This is actually a pretty difficult matchup in my opinion, because your opponent ends up having Barb Barrel, they have Miner, they end up having Fireball, so they have a lot of great ways of killing your Expo. Let's see how he navigates this one. I think my biggest issue is if they end up having the Rascals variation, you end up logging the Rascals, and then they drop Goblin Gang right behind it. And then basically what ends up happening is the Thick Boy, the Thick Rascal, is going to be tanking for the Goblin Gang, and then you're never really able to break through with the Expo. So let's see how Ian navigates this matchup. We end up seeing him play it a little bit aggressive in single elixir. He's going to end up dropping another Expo here. We see a Miner. He's going to end up having Rascal, so this is the biggest issue that I face. He actually does log it, but, you know, the Rascal is not actually going to be getting too much damage on it. So the Expo does die, but the Expo will get a couple of hits on top of the tower as well. So yeah, Ian is definitely at a little bit of a deficit. This is what I was talking about, and this is why it's actually a really difficult matchup. His opponent is running a Miner cycle deck with a lot of answers, essentially. Usually with most Miner cycle decks, if you drop a Miner on top of the tower, you straight up die. If you're running the B-Rad deck with a 3.0 cycle, or I'm not really sure what the cycle is anymore. There's so many different variations. That one will just straight up die. The Miner Poison that's standard, it just straight up dies if you do end up going in for that Miner on top of the tower. So that's really unfortunate that Ian has got this matchup. He's going to end up logging again. The Goblin Gang comes down. This is my biggest issue, but we see him end up going in for an Ice Golem and Archers. So you saw his opponent, I guess, overcommit a couple times with the Miner and not saving the Miner for the Expo. So Ian is really taking advantage of that. I guess the rule of thumb here is if your opponent ends up going for Miners on the towers consistently, you can actually end up going for a Expo when you've gotten like a 6 elixir advantage, because his opponent consistently went in for those Miners. And yes, he got Skeletons, but I guess Ian still has a 5 elixir advantage from that. So he's setting up a defensive Expo that he ends up going in for another Expo. And the Expo is going to get locked on top of the Mortar, but we see Rascals yet again, so he's going to go drop the Ice Golem. Notice that Ice Golem placement, how it's tucked in the corner. That's always the best placement. He's saving the Ice Spirit so then he can redirect that Miner, but unfortunately he just gets Fireballed. So that's one of the things that you're going to see very good Expo players, just like Ian, do consistently. They're going to adjust their card orders. So they always end up having an Ice Spirit for the Miner, so then when the Miner is dropped, maybe the Ice Spirit doesn't catch it, but it at least resets it so that you can drop Skeletons so the Miner's not targeting your Expo, Miner's not targeting your tower. That's the key thing that you're going to see over and over again. He's going to end up dropping the Ice Golem to make sure that he kites the Mortar, because he knows that the Ice Spirit's just going to die. And unfortunately, Dark Goblin comes down, but he's just going to go for the Archer Snipe, so that's a really cool play. So if you guys didn't know that, you can actually end up going for Archer Snipe on top of the Mortar, and you don't always have to use your Tesla. In single elixir for the first, like, Tesla, sometimes you can actually go for Tesla right on top of the Mortar, and then you can end up going for Expo in combination with that. So if you have the Tesla still alive after it snipes the Mortar, then you can go for an Expo, and then the Tesla is actually allowing you to make a very, very formidable offense, but simply wasn't the case there because he wasn't even going for that tower. So Expo connects again. He's really just made such great defenses with that Expo. If you keep that Expo alive, even if it's at a little bit of HP, it can make magic happen. Another thing that you guys are seeing consistently is notice the placement of that defensive Expo. His opponent is forced to fireball the left-hand side. He's not able to fireball the tower that he wants. It's also pretty low. So if you drop that low defensive Expo, you make sure that your opponent can't fireball the right-hand side that is weaker effectively, and it's also making sure that it can deny a Mortar. And then on top of that, it's also enabling you to set up another Expo, and it's going to defend anything that your opponent ends up throwing at you. So Rascals, bait units, they all simply die. Yes, he can drop a defensive Mortar, but that's about it. So Ian does snag that W. He played that extremely cleanly. He capitalized on a lot of his opponent's overcommittals with the miner. And he even came back from a little bit of a deficit early on. So let's go jump right onto the next game and see what Ian has in store for us. So it looks like Ian has another mortar bait matchup on his hands. And unfortunately, guys, he ends up having a log cycle early on. So yeah, that's something that's pretty safe generally. But whenever you're playing against a bait deck, it feels kind of bad. There's the Tesla that I was talking about earlier. Sometimes you don't always want to end up going for the archers because they're going to get splashed. That Tesla early on is going to be really good. Unfortunately, it doesn't end up having the Expo. I'm pretty sure he would have supported that. And now he's going to be going ops lane because he ended up having an archer there. So he's going to go for a log on top of the Rascals. We've seen him do that every single time. Ice Spirit comes down, but it gets snagged. And notice one of the things that he did there is he ended up going for a skeleton surround on top of Barbarian. If you guys know that timing, as soon as the Barbarian crossed the river, you drop the skeletons, and the skeletons surround it, and the Barbarian barrel actually hits the skeletons. So if you want to win with Expo 2.9 at the highest level, or even any level against Barbarian, generally you really need to get that timing down. So if you guys haven't already practiced that, go into some custom games with your friends, and just make sure like you have the Expo at the river, they drop the Barbarian, you skeletons surround, and you make sure you time it so then the skeletons pick up that Barbarian hit, and a little bit of HP from the Expo, as you guys know, equates to hundreds and hundreds of damage, sometimes even 1,000. So if that happens, you guys, that can make the difference between winning and losing the game, and that's just a mechanic that Eden has showcased. And all the top 2.9 players, Crafter does that as well. So he's going to end up going for the Ice Golem consistently to tank. He's going to log the Rascals, and his opponent ends up going in for Spear Goblins and Barbaro again. He ends up dropping Ice Spirit to make sure that he can go and snag those Spear Goblins. But one of the things that I've noticed against Mortar Bait, he's not very afraid to play really aggressive. He plays super aggressive in single elixir. And that's pretty cool because then his opponent isn't able to play really aggressive with the miners, because if he does play aggressive with the miner, he's just going to straight up lose the game. So if you're good with 2.9, you take away the potential of your opponent getting chip damage, and if that happens, then you're going to have a pretty commanding lead, and you can set up defensive expos, and you don't end up having to play like really risky in double elixir. So I think that in this matchup, you need to actually play pretty aggressive in single elixir if you get a good card cycle. That is, if you have log for the Rascals, if you end up having a pretty formidable way of dealing with the Barbarian, you need to have the Skeletons in cycle. Another thing that we just saw is he ended up going for the Fireball on top of the Rascals and the Mortar on the opposite side. That's another pretty cool thing. He's up enough elixir to justify that. He ends up going for the Skeletons round, and then he goes in for the log on top of the Miner. So that's something that very few people would actually do, but I know that that is such a cool thing. Like, look at how much elixir he is, and look at the situation that he's in. He's playing so aggressive, and he forced out even more units that his opponent didn't want to drop. Like, you don't want to drop a miner there. You'd rather drop the log bait cards. You'd rather be dropping Barbarian. But his opponent just didn't have the card cycle in hand, and when 2.9 is able to force you, your opponent, to make the wrong play and drop cards that they just simply can't afford to drop, then they're never going to be able to cycle back to the answers that they need for the Expo. So just putting in the aggression when your opponent has a bad card cycle is one of the things that I've seen time and time again from Ian in this matchup and in most matchups in particular. So yeah, he won this game, and I also, one of the other things that we saw earlier is the defensive Expo, and then the defensive Expo supported his other offensive Expo. So everything that he did this game was really like seamless. I like the defensive Expo there. If you're ever feeling not so confident about your situation, especially when you have a damage lead, you drop that defensive Expo, and when they cycle a miner, it's going to go right into the Expo too. So say they end up cycling a miner on your tower, it's just going to die way quicker, and since your Expo is going to be outside of the fireball range on the tower that they want to work on, they can't really do anything besides cycle bait units in the back that are simply going to die. They can't really cycle a mortar into your defensive Expo because your defensive Expo is going to be chipping away. They could drop tanks in front of it, but that's going to be a losing battle for them. So defensive Expo in this matchup is a pretty good way of resetting, or if you feel like you can't break through, a defensive Expo is always pretty safe. So well played by Ian. Let's go jump right into the next game. It's going to be an Expo mirror matchup, but it's going to be a little bit different. There is going to be the Rocket here to shut down any Expo on Ian's side. So let's see how he plays this matchup. I think that this one's a little bit more difficult for me generally than the 2.9 mirror matchup. I feel like the 2.9 mirror matchup, you always just play really aggressive. Let's see how he navigates this one. So unfortunately, he does not actually get that Ice Golem down in front to tank, and he gets absolutely slaughtered for that. That's so much damage. At this point, Hyun is BMing with a 20 win mode. He's like, yo, I got this game in the bag. Let's see what Ian does to come back in this game. So we end up seeing Ice Spirit, Skeletons. One of the things that he told me, he always likes cycling Ice Spirit and Skeletons at the start of the game. He doesn't really like end up going in for a Expo. He feels like that's a really bad play. And as Crafter has said before, same with Ian, like you just don't really want to be cycling your archers if you don't absolutely have to, because they're one of your only air answers. So that's another thing that is going to be pretty standard across the board. Yes, they could cycle it, and sometimes they do if they just feel like it. But for the most part, if you're trying to play ultra safe, you don't really want to cycle your archers at the start of the game, because you never know what your opponent's really got in hand. You never really know what your opponent has, and a lot of times it's pretty nice to end up having those archers not split against a Graveyard deck, or not split against a Lava Hound clone or Lava Loon deck right out of the gate, because it's pretty good on defense there, guys. And if you're having to cycle 4 more cards in single elixir, sometimes the defense is actually going to be a little bit messy. So he's going to end up going for the Expo opposite lane here. He's not going to go same lane because his opponent could end up going for logs. He's probably going to Ice Golem in that little pocket. That pocket placement of the Ice Golem, you guys are going to see time and time again. It gives him a lot more time to drop it. He's able to delay the drop of the card. And if you guys know traditional Clash Royale, you never really want to be dropping a card until you absolutely have to maximize the potential of your opponent making a misplay. If your opponent sees a card and they know what you're going to do a little bit earlier, they can respond and they have more time. So maximizing those placements, it might seem really stupid to some people. It's like, oh, it's like a 1 second thing. But those things compound over time, and placements, if you notice them and you try to improve them, over a while, you're going to actually see significant improvement in the amount of games that you're winning. Maybe it's not a game-defining thing in a few situations, but maybe that 1 extra second or that 1 extra elixir that you eventually get from just making sure that your opponent has to make ineffective trades, or making sure that your opponent ends up having to go in for a little bit of waiting time where they're leaking elixir because they don't know if you're going to drop a card or not. Those things compound and it allows you to win games that sometimes you otherwise wouldn't. So in this game, we end up seeing the Rocket. We see how aggressive Ian's playing. He's really not dropping defensive expos. In the 2.9 mirror matchup, you either want to be dropping a lot of defensive expos, or you want to be playing really aggressive, and you can't let your opponent ever have an expo on the map. Same here. It looks like Ian's just going to be fireballing the right-hand side, the right-hand tower, and the expo there. He's not going to let that thing stay on the map. He's consistently making sure that that expo is dying as quick as possible. He's going to log it and fireball it. So if your opponent ends up having a defensive expo in any expo mirror matchup, what ends up happening is your opponent is able to set up an offensive expo using that defensive one, and you can't really do anything because the Ice Golem is just going to die really quickly, and then the expos stack, and it's just too much. But the thing about Rocket against Expo, it's actually significantly worse right now. Like, it's not a super hard counter ever since Expo got that little bit of buff. It got a HP buff, and Ian's not even going to go challenge that Expo. He's just cycling an Ice Golem, Ice Spirit, Fireball. He definitely wishes he had an Ice Golem back in cycle, but he's going to go log right now so that his opponent's not able to set up another Expo with that Expo still on the map. So that's so, so important. You're going to see Dan Gannon, you're going to see Crafter. When they play this matchup, they never let Expo stay on the map. But when you see lesser Expo players, they always mess that up. Obviously, Ian does not make misplays like that ever, and he's just making magic happen. He's going in for a log. He's going to end up killing that Ice Wizard. He's going to get Skeletons down. And it's just so cool to see someone just be able to play so aggressive against defensive expos, break through against it, not even have to fireball the side that they're working on, but because the Rocket is not able to fully counter the expo, he's able to consistently apply more aggression on the left-hand side. And he's going to go in for a Tesla there for a +2 trade. He's going to end up dropping an Ice Spear to redirect that Mega Minion. Oh, he's hoping, but then the Ice Golem got in his way. That's a little bit unfortunate, but he's also consistently applying aggression with the Expo, so then his opponent's not able to Rocket cycle, right? So he's going to end up going in for a defensive expo here. It's really important to make sure that when your opponent goes in for an expo, you have an answer. And obviously the Mega Minion was coming down, so you can't really rely on archers. You can't rely on a Tesla block. You're very rarely going to see high-level players go for the Tesla block. Air Surfer has also specifically stated that he doesn't really like going for the expo block with the Tesla very often, because your opponent can just block it. You have to fireball a lot of the times if your opponent ends up going in for like an Ice Golem in front of their expo. Otherwise, your Tesla will never lock on top of the expo. So that's another thing. If you guys are forced to do it, a lot of times you're actually going to end up going for a fireball right on top. His opponent ends up going in for, oh my gosh, a NATO. An Ice Spirit might actually be able to redirect that. Log coming down. Crap. Yeah, I think he's got it. I think Ian's got it. He's going to be able to Fireball. I was like, this is a sketchy scenario, but Ian was able to come out with the W, even after the little bit of a slip up at the start. Some things to take away in that mirror matchup: never let your opponent end up having a Expo on the map for very long. You always got to Fireball log it, even if you're not ending up hitting anything with the Fireball and log. You're not hitting the tower that you want, really. You're just hitting the Expo and removing that, so then you're able to play more aggressive with your Expo. Because if there's a defensive Expo on the map, Ian is never able to set up an aggressive Expo. If he doesn't set up aggressive Expos and his opponent has a defensive Expo, he can start rocket cycling Ian out. So Ian never let that happen. He consistently went in for aggressive Expos. He killed his opponent's Expo with his spells. And eventually he was able to overrun Hyun with his Expo cycling because rocket is not a hard counter to Expo anymore. So very well played by Ian. And man, he's just a super solid Expo player. I was really impressed today. RG Lightning and Mortar Miner Bait with Bar Barrel have always been tough matchups for 2.9 Expo players around the world, but I hope that this video was able to help you out. If you guys enjoyed today's video, make sure to go give Ian a fat follow. His Twitter is actually going to be the clan right now that we're in. Go check that out, and the link will be down below in the pinned comment and in the description of the video as well. Much love to Ian for coming on today and showcasing this top tier Expo gameplay. And if you guys enjoyed today's video, make sure to sauce me a fat thumbs up. Let me know down below in the comments section what pro or what deck archetype you guys want me to cover next time in the deep dive into Deck Masters. Thanks for watching, thanks for chilling with me, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace out.